Hello and welcome, everyone. Today's session is the apex of agility, ColdFusion 2021 and automated pipelines. My name is Brian Sape, and I'm going to be covering a couple of high-level items with different ways that you can automate your builds and some different tools that can be used along the way to complete that task. There are a lot of different variations to this. There's a lot of different tools that you can use, but I'm going to try to highlight on some basic principles and some concepts that you could apply pretty easily in your application build processes that you've got today. So it's really touching on a number of CI/CD concepts and some different ways that you can intertwine that with ColdFusion, especially with ColdFusion 2021. The one thing I will mention, there's going to be some slides in here, obviously, just kind of hitting on some high-level items. I'm going to give you a quick introduction just on the CI components and benefits, and then get into some of the high-level items with CI. We'll cover tools, cover GitHub, and then CI/CD. The slides are going to be more informational, but I am going to do an actual hands-on demo, and we're going to start with creating a local environment, making a couple changes, and then utilizing tools like GetCracking and GitHub and Jenkins in order to see that process through from the start to the end. So really going to kind of replicate almost like an SDLC in your own environment. So if you're here for the hands-on part or the demo, the coding part, I'm going to go into the very high-level configuration and actual execution of cases. So that'll be in the second half of this demonstration. All right, so to get started, just remember that I always try to hit this, anything with principles of DevOps. There is really no right or wrong way. So I'm going to give you a very basic high-level design or concept. Obviously, you'll probably go in many different directions as a process matures. Really what I want to hit on is kind of adhering to the 5 different principles. So what we're really going to be focusing on is the coding part of it, and it does not matter what kind of code we're talking about, what application stack you're using, but if it's code or it's something that you want to put into version control and then possibly publish or do something with, then you're in the right spot. We'll cover version control. I'm going to particularly handle in this demonstration Git, but obviously you have a few other options out there. The build process, this is where we're going to get into a CI tool. With that said, there's a number of different CI tools. I'm a big fan of Jenkins. I have no issues with the other CI tools by any means. If you're using something else, a Bamboo or Travis or something else, that's totally fine here too. The same concepts apply. I avoid plugins at all costs. I like keeping things very scripted. I find it future-proofs things quite a bit, especially in the Jenkins open source community. Plugins can disappear quickly, and then you've got a big problem if you don't understand how it's working. And then we'll cover real quick some of the different testing cases, and then even going over deployments, how you could potentially rsync code over to different servers, move to a dev, a staging, a prod, a QA, whatever the case is. You've got a lot of different options in this path. You can get very creative as you're going through this process and it matures. The constant thing to reiterate is the feedback loop. The whole point here is to keep that open feedback loop with your development team, fixing those bugs much earlier in the process, shift left as it's referred to. It's going to be contextually more relevant for the developer to fix it as they're working through things. So that's one of the big benefits of the principle in DevOps of going to a CI/CD process. So real quick, just a couple of high-level overviews. Look at this as a chance to possibly alleviate broken processes, revamping code. It gives you a reason to rewrite things, especially if you've got a lot of hard-coded code or you're directly developing against a integrated environment, and also empowering team to very quickly be able to make changes, identify problems, and quickly release a build without a bunch of hurdles or steps in the way. The biggest, honestly, I think the hurdle you'll run into or challenge if you're new at this, it's going to be convincing management employees that this is the right decision. It can be very intimidating and quite daunting task when you first set out on it. So you probably will receive or could run into some flack as you start this process. But trust me, 100%, it's definitely worth it once you get through the sticky parts. And just the benefit, it is increasing those small deliverables and getting faster and more agile, which is obviously the benefit and a nice buzzword, especially you can throw back with management. But feedback is critical. That's the whole basis here of keeping those loops open and really giving your teams a chance to revamp and refactor and really focus on getting things cleaned up and more efficient. That whole CI/CD workflow, like I said, it's going to take some effort. I found, especially when you're really trying to make a cultural change or environment change, getting a couple little small wins will do you quite a bit of good as you're trying to convince and really mature this process into your organization. But the benefits, I think they'll pay off. I can give you hard facts on that. A small team can do hundreds of builds at a very rapid pace and a high delivery rate with very little error and confusion. When you have a lot of moving parts and dependencies on teams and you're building out massive code bases and you become almost, it's difficult to start to do those small releases and iterative builds, especially if you've got, customer satisfaction is really what you're going for. Waiting 3 or 4 or 5 months, developer works on something very early in the process, the likelihood of them having that contextual relevance back to them on how it works and be able to quickly make adjustments and address the issue, it's probably less likely than a developer who's pushing stuff every couple of days. The key parts, get the version control, under wraps. Again, I know I'm probably not preaching to people that have been in this process or understand it, but you've got to, obviously get version control into play, especially from an automated standpoint. I don't like to touch code manually and move things. Those integrations are painful. So a good version control that can then speak or talk to different applications or CI tools is today what I'll demo, but that's really where you want to try to strive to be. And then building testing, having a QA department is great. Obviously, having other people look over your shoulder to verify and test code, but it's really nice that in a lot of the new CI tool and processes, you can bake in a number of test components. And I'm not just talking test software, but you can integrate different types of brute force attack or OWASP. You can set up and code things programmatically that continue to run, especially after a build occurs. And to me, one of the biggest benefits is moving that code from environment, not necessarily from your version control systems, but actually moving your source code from different environments or different servers, which you can totally do with a good, healthy CI process that you have in place. Again, just to recap the code, any language, this does not matter, size of team. It's not, oh, we can't do it, CF can't do it, I can't do it because of this. Yeah, you might not be able to because of the code base, but again, that goes back to the conversation that we could have of really having a chance to kind of revitalize and revamp your code base, and especially get developers excited again about not having to do manual tasks. And the key is to make sure that developers are constantly committing and pushing code and seeing things through on a daily basis, not necessarily stacking stuff up to monthly releases or quarterly releases. Especially as far as automated build and testing, it's a boring task, or can be. I don't know many developers that just sit down and look forward to the testing part. But with a good CI process in place, some of that can be offloaded and automatically be triggered. So, if you've got end users and their satisfaction is a huge advantage for you in keeping them coming back and keeping repeat customers, if you're in the e-com field or just in general, a good feeling about your site, then having these constant builds and test cases running and trying to identify things before they become a more public issue, you'll find great benefits in that. And then, as far as we've said it, the CI/CD process, it is going to promote many more, frequent integrations, and that's the key, keeping things very relevant and fresh, and finding things early. So In a particular setup I have right now, it's constant. Like, you get a task, we create very small tasks in Jira, you check them out, you build a feature against it, and then you release that feature and it goes out. And on every build, there's testing and checks running. Things that you might just forget to do as a developer, it's automated and covered, so you don't have to worry about it. All right, and then deployments, it's moving source code is monotonous, to say the least, and it does come with a risk associated with it. The more times you open a connection and you're moving code, that human element is a risky thing to take on. Mistakes are going to happen. You're wasting time on bad deployments, on conflicts, on integrations, contention with code. If you're building out a team that you're looking to scale, this is yet another great opportunity to move more into the CI/CD concept in DevOps to get things, maybe reduce that risk and reduce the chance of mistakes. So I think our current setup now, there isn't a single entry or login into our production servers. Everything is automatically deployed and pushed through our pipelines without that risk. And I think today we're sitting, hundreds of builds and not one error, not one bit of downtime. There's no server goes down, don't understand who did what, who touched what. Everything is very clearly marked and designated who's doing what build is it related to, what was the health prior to and after. And these are the things that CI can really help you with. It's also, I think, prudent not to lock yourself into a lot of third parties and different sets of tools. I am using Jenkins, and I believe in the product, but I even in there try to reduce risk with plugins and dependencies on other modules. It does have a Groovy engine in it. We'll go over that in the demo part, that you can go and script and get pretty creative. So the tools I want to cover here, obviously ColdFusion conference. So we're going to roll with ColdFusion 2021 as the application development environment or platform. And I'll have a couple little sample blocks of code that I'll write. We'll make some changes into a couple different deployments through the process. But again, Jenkins, open source, no cost, and it's a pretty easy thing to get up and running even locally. So today's demo, I'm running Jenkins locally, even though my Git instance is in the cloud and ColdFusion's local. It does not matter. You're still able to run some cycles and actually do things from Jenkins and even remote out to those, maybe remote boxes or cloud instances if you want to connect. And then for the Git GUI, I really like GetCracking. I've used a number of different ones. If you're looking for one, to me, that's pretty intuitive and really would allow you to simplify and streamline process, especially if you're going to onboard this to developers that maybe aren't as comfortable on command line or not as familiar with Git. I think GetCracking is a pretty phenomenal tool, and we'll showcase that here a little bit later. So for the tools, I'm going to run in ColdFusion 2021. There are some, I think by this point, most everybody's probably at least taken a look or explored it. There's a lot of different advancements in 2021 that really assisted in kind of moving the whole CI process along and making things a little bit easier, streamlining it, if you will. And they introduced package management or modules. So when they released the product, it was much thinner out of the gates. The JVM was significantly reduced. Startup times were reduced, but they did put in everything can be silently installed or script based. So in Jenkins, you could technically do an installation. You can do a startup of your CF servers, a shutdown. Today, I'm going to run a couple different commands like the CFPM package manager. I'm going to check and try to do an install on a module. I'm also going to do a scan and install to have that automatically in Jenkins scan through my code base and see what packages or modules that I need to have installed for things to work correctly. But mostly it's pretty lightweight, and it's just an excellent candidate to move to help grow this CI concept in your organization. And then Jenkins, there's no real limitation in there. I mean, especially if you're going to go the scripting route. Obviously, they have a big collection of plugins, and I'm definitely not saying don't use them. Just be mindful that they can go into an orphan state at any time, and you better know how it's working, and you better be confident and how to address issues. But you can build software, test, deploy. There's really no limit there. It supports a number of version control systems, including Git, so it ties in real nicely with Git webhooks, which I'll cover. And those webhooks, cron jobs, URL invocations, all available triggers baked into Jenkins. So, without having to log into Jenkins to manually do a build, you can automate that process through what I just said: webhooks, cron jobs, URL invocations, scheduled tasks inside of Jenkins to execute a build process or run a job. But the scripting support in Groovy is really what I enjoy and gives you total flexibility on the product. And then lastly, GetCracking. Again, it's just intuitive. It's got a built-in editor. Git hosting integrations are baked in. There's issue tracking, so we use Jira on a day-to-day basis, very simplified version of it with very few tasks that actually have to be created or built into Jira to accommodate just a software release. But there's Git smart commits, and there's a number of other things you can do. But GetCracking also can grab all of your assigned Jira tickets, and you can go, I'm going to showcase today the GitFlow model. I know that might be frowned upon now. It's, I think, considered somewhat outdated, GitFlow is, but I'm still a fan of it. I don't really execute GitFlow to the T, but it's, to me, it's an excellent way if you're feature-based. GitFlow is still really relevant and a great way to do your deployments and do your builds. And that ties in directly with that issue tracking integration. So in this case, Jira. So you can tie Jira directly into GetCracking, create a feature, and then log it, submit it, and push it through the process. Now you don't have to do that. Jump into Jira, make all your comments, go back to Git, go back to your Git command line, then you have to go into Jenkins. No, you can automate this whole process from the time a developer checks out some code, makes his change, makes her change, and pushes it up. You'll find that it's a complete process that can be automated. And it's an easy and safe editor. I really enjoy it. You can see here we've got just a kind of a quick screenshot with all the different features in here. They even have undos, and you can download it for free. 7-day trial in the Pro, but you can definitely, once it even expires out of Pro, it's still very usable as a product free of charge. But it's a very clean, we'll demo it, but it's a very clean UI and very easy to navigate, even for a beginner. All right, and so Git, today for the demo, we're gonna go over GitHub in the cloud, but there's a number of things we'll focus on. So I'm gonna go over basically just a basic repository, how to create a webhook for automatic integrations into Jenkins, and then also SSH keys. Now, it used to be, I think, even this time last year, you could use a username and password to do these connections for webhooks. That has since changed, and I'm assuming if you're on some type of 2FA or MFA type setup for security in your GitHub account, that would not work anyway. So it is important for a lot of what I'm going to show you today, and it's pretty easy to create these keys. I'll show you where they're located in Jenkins, and I'll show you where they're located in Git. Once you establish that connection, it does open up a number of possibilities. And then for Git, I'm using Git Repository, so we'll have a demo repository today. But once your process starts to grow and the organization adopts more and more, I think you'll find multiple uses for Git, including a number of different repositories, even for configs or maybe setup files or just even notes. But the idea is that it does create a team effort and a collaboration, centralized spot to really get everyone involved and be able to quickly identify who's making changes, what in the source code has changed, and give you that immediate visibility into what's going on in the environment. And then webhooks, to me, this is probably one of the most powerful uses of really getting that automation or that CI process automated. Git has, I think, 300, I could be way off on that, but it's quite a few different things that you can trigger a webhook on. Now you can say, send me everything, and it's going to send you everything under the sun if anything in your repos change. If you do have different branches, like if you go to the GitFlow model, you're probably going to have a main. Master is no longer a thing, but if you go with main as your default, your origin, you could have a development or develop. You might have a QA, you might have a build, whatever. you can create webhooks for each one of those, and it's really simple to do with SCM checkouts, notifications in, say, Jenkins. But it is the starting point for automatically announcing events, and quite frankly, the possibilities with it are endless. You can get very creative. Recapping on SSH keys, get away from the username and passwords, create an SSH key, make sure it's correct in GitHub and Jenkins or whatever CI tool you're using, or even an app. You can build your own custom apps around Git, and change it frequently. So after today's presentation, I will be changing all these passwords and keys, but I'll show some things in here today to make sure that the demonstration provides enough of a starting point for you to get going. And then Jenkins, so we got a couple of things I'm going to cover. The credentials part, that's going to be your entry into automation, and we'll showcase that. That goes back into the SSH creation, and then creating global credentials in Jenkins, and then creating an item or a pipeline. The couple different things you can do here. There's a number of different types of things or projects or types of tasks you can create in Jenkins. We're going to cover in particular a pipeline today and show the Groovy script and how that works, and then really highlight the continuous integration and delivery. When you do, one thing to note on the Jenkins SSH credentials, make sure, and I'm only stating this because it is a point of frustration and the documentation can be a bit rough reading through. When you're creating an SSH key, make sure it's your Jenkins user, because when Jenkins in GitHub begin to try to communicate, it is going to be running its builds under the Jenkins user. So you will run into some issues if it automatically by default goes down to root or some other user. You run into a very difficult time debugging that, and it can take some time to troubleshoot. So just keep that in mind when you're generating those keys. Do it under the Jenkins user. You do have to share those with GitHub. So again, when GitHub does that communication back over, it's going to expect Jenkins to be running as Jenkins. And I'll show you how to use those SSH keys directly in a pipeline for an SCM checkout. If you want to go the route of plugins, there are ones out there that will support some very simple integrations. Again, just make sure you know what you're picking. And the different types of pipelines you can create in Jenkins: freestyle, pipeline, multi-config, folder, and multi-branch. So depending on what kind of a task you're wanting to do, I typically will stick to like a freestyle and pipeline for web-based things. But you can also create folders with test cases and different, execution scripts, and a pipeline can call another pipeline, so you can actually trigger multiple pipelines off one. When I say you get creative and carried away, you can absolutely get creative and carried away. It is quite expansive on the options that you have inside of Jenkins. And I'm going to highlight the Groovy engine. Again, you can go the plugin route, but Groovy, if you're a coder, I would think you'll be partial to the Groovy route, because it does give you the option to do just basic scripting to do a lot of different fundamental things in Jenkins. The fundamental part of a pipeline is a step. The syntax has changed, and there's also different syntaxes in a Jenkins Groovy script that you can execute as far as how you want to do your builds. Today, I'll be going over the step process, and you'll see each step when we do the demo and run it. Each one runs in a sequence of events, and you can put a lot of different, logic around that as well. And steps is really what gives Jenkins kind of like task 1, task 2, task 3, and that works for both declarative and scripted. So if you're going to go the declarative route, which is announcing things, and I'll show that here today, it supports both. There is a help engine inside of Jenkins if you're not as familiar with the Groovy scripting, and you'll see in here, this is just a very basic pipeline declaration here. I've got pipeline, and then I've got a post, which is after everything runs, and then I've got a failure catch in there. You can also run as different agents. There's a lot of warnings, and I'm not going to get into it, but if you are going to run Jenkins, running it on multiple nodes and how you execute and do builds, you have to be careful for security reasons. But you'll see in here different also agents that you can run as. If there are certain steps of the process that you have to swap an agent out, then you can do so. And then each one of the stages has its own text value that you can then see through the visual graph and know exactly what's running in. All right, so that covers us on kind of the high level, what we're going to be talking about here today. So I want to get into, let's get into the actual demonstration. So first things first, I am technically developing local using command box. I won't go into how to do that install. I would highly recommend command box as an option to help you with a local development environment. It is absolutely not required, but I do find it useful for starting and stopping servers. You can see here, I've just got a very simple directory locally, and I've got a few files in there, and there's a server.json. So if you're familiar with command box, you're going to know that's the definitions for the startup. And I'm going to be running just an instance of CF 2021. So pretty simple there. Command box is an option. Otherwise, you can go to just running ColdFusion locally, and I have that running as well, and I'll use that as part of the demo. But command box will allow you to get up and running pretty easily and get you at least be able to develop locally on your machine with CF. The next thing I want to cover, let's go to GitHub. So if I go into GitHub here, I've already got logged into this just sample demonstration of repo. You can see here, it's my own account. I've got a simple repo with a couple files in it, nothing fancy, but one of the first things you're going to want to do is go into settings, and then you're going to want to go to webhooks. And inside of there, you're going to see a webhook for your Jenkins instance. Now, since I'm running Jenkins local, let's bring that up here real quick. So I've got just a Jenkins instance running on my local machine. Of course, I need to create a tunnel from the outside web because my Git's running out on the web, and I want to be able to interact with my local build. So I'm just using ngrok. I've got a very simple tunnel spun up pointing to localhost 8888. And you can see I've got some traffic already coming over, and that's going to the GitHub webhook. Now, when you create a webhook in GitHub, fair warning on this too, you're going to have to end it with /GitHub-webhook/ and your content type is application xww. This will automatically then try to push every single webhook trigger out to wherever you need it to go. And you'll see down here, I've got 3 different radio buttons. You can just push the event, send me everything, or let me select individual events. If I do select that, there are quite a few, and as you check into these, there's even more. So there's a healthy batch of options for you to kind of scan through. Maybe you're going to create multiple webhooks, maybe you have personal apps or different CI tools, but that really comes down to what you prefer. And once I hit this update webhook, it will try to run a quick check, and you can come into recent deliveries and you can see the tag, and then you can get details on the actual webhook, the time, and then what was pushed in it. So, and that would be per repo. So right now I've got this demonstration repo, and I can create multiple webhooks for that, but I can also create a whole set of different webhooks for a different repo if I wish to do so. The other thing, as far as configurations for GitHub, you'll want to go out to your settings, and this is where the SSH comes into play. You'll have a tab under your main account, so not under the actual repo account. And if GitHub doesn't have the best multi-tenant setup, so if you do have a personal account, you're also using it maybe for a work account or another account, you want to make sure that these SSH keys are actually added at that root level under setup. And if you come into here, you can see I've got my Jenkins demonstration, and I've got my valid SSH key in here. I will kill that after this presentation. But that's a way how to get a SSH key. Now, that SSH key I just showed you, that was created locally against Jenkins. So if I come into Jenkins here, and we'll go over the UI here in just a second. When you click on Manage Jenkins, you're going to have a slew of different options for plugin management, security configs, credentials, managing global credentials, doing nodes and clouds. You can get into some really pretty sophisticated things, especially if you're going to spin up, spin down, but obviously a bit out of the scope for today's conversation. But your main thing to focus on here, you've got these managed credentials. And inside of here, I've got this global key of an SSH key here, and then the user. So I've actually created this SSH key under my own name. And then when I run my jobs, I switch the user over to that. And there's my private key embedded safely in there, but that's your connection. So, once you create an SSH key, it's pretty simple to add a new one. You'd come back in here. I should have actually shown that before I left, but you can come in and then add a new key. And when you do that, you'll have a couple different options. Again, I'd stay far away from username with password. You can create a custom GitHub app, but you have this very simple selection here, SSH username with private key. Once you generate that locally on your Jenkins server under the correct user, you come back here, you can leave username, whatever the username is going to be, Jenkins. Well, actually, if I get out of that, you should have the ID, which you can leave blank, description, your username, and then you just enter the private key directly. So very easy to create. Once you do that, grab that same public private key, go over to GitHub, and then you'll be able to connect the two. In order for those webhooks to fire from GitHub to Jenkins, you absolutely have to have those SSH keys in place. It can be a very frustrating thing if you run into a lot of errors, but really the key thing to keep in mind is make sure you create those keys under the correct user. All right, so as far as creating an item, when you do, you have an option between the items that we had discussed earlier. So you have freestyle projects, pipelines, multi-configs, folders, multi-branch, organizational. I prefer the pipeline over the, I prefer either the freestyle or the pipeline project or item when I'm generally creating them for web-based things. I've got this ColdFusion Summit one here that I've created, and you're going to see when you first come in, there are a number of steps that I've got that are automated. So the first thing I do is do a checkout against the source control, which in this case is Git through the webhooks, and then also be able to go in and get code out and pull it out based on changes. I can do a temporary sleep. Here I'm going to install the PDF module through CFPM, and then I'm also going to run under the CFPM a scan and install, which is going to look at my entire code base, which I've pointed locally in this case. It's going to scan through every line of code, and it's going to determine what modules I'm going to require in order for ColdFusion to run in a healthy state. And at the very end, I encourage you to always delete the workspace. If you don't, you will find that the amount, especially if you have very large source code repositories that you're continually pushing, it's going to become very heavy, very bloated, and there's really no reason to hang on to the workspace once your deployment or your steps are completed, unless you, maybe for life you want to do a backup, but there's probably way better options than using Jenkins workspace to do that. Each build comes with an ID. So sometimes, I might be in a situation where I want to take a snapshot and I can link it to an ID and then store that somewhere. And that way, if things go sideways, I can reinstate the old build. But of course, everything is going through source control. So you definitely always have that to fall back on as well. When you want to configure, it's very simple to go in here. You go into the configuration option, and I keep it simple. So the build trigger for this is going to be a GitHub trigger, hook trigger for Git SCM polling. Now that's an easy checkbox to hit, but you still actually have to put in the SCM code. So down here in my script, you can see just a couple of things. I've got a stage called checkout SCM main branch. If I wanted to do the develop branch in my development environment, I could do that. If I had, QA, staging, testing, server, API, whatever the case is, whatever branch in your GitHub repo, that's all you have to put there to check that out. And then you have to make sure, don't give it the HTTPS URL for the repository. You want to give it the SSH. So when you come into your repository, let's go back out here. Let's look at demonstration. Inside of here, there's going to be a tab right here. And for cloning, you can do HTTPS, but there's an SSH option. Make sure you copy the SSH option since we are using SSH keys. And then in the plugin, that's all you need. You drop it in the URL. And then for credentials ID, I named the earlier key I created in Jenkins SSH key. And it's as simple as putting that SSH key in there. Now, there's definitely ways to make this even more secure than what I've got here. Again, this is just for demo purposes, but you can do it through files. There's a number of other ways you can secure this even further. But as you notice, I don't have to put any passwords or usernames directly in the actual build script. It's just the identifier of SSH key. A couple different functions you can run in Jenkins. You've got, temp sleep here. I've just got to sleep for a second. Then I've got a Windows batch command. I am doing this demo on Windows, but I prefer to run this on Linux. But for demo purposes, this is what I was going to serve it up on. But you can run a batch in here. I'm giving it a command line. Again, a wonderful thing with 2021 that ships. I can point it to my local instance of ColdFusion and then just run this command CFPM. It puts me into the CFPM utility, and then I can just pass it the argument of install in PDF, and it's going to attempt to do that on the build. Then I've got another 2021 highlight here where I've got the scan and install, and I'm running another batch, again, pointing to my local instance, and then running the scan install, and then giving it the actual web root. And then ColdFusion is going to go ahead and start to run the process through Jenkins. It's going to start scanning my entire code base and see if I potentially need to add any modules. And then lastly here, I've got the delete workspace. So we're going to run this here in just a second, but I'd rather show you a real life example of code moving through an area. So we're going to hop over to GetCracking. Now, there's a couple little configurations you'll need to do in here, and I'm going to try to speed this up here so we can do a couple different builds. When you log into GetCracking, you're going to see a settings option here. The two things you need to do, you need to create an SSH key here. And this is the same one that we created earlier, so you can create an SSH key directly in for GetCracking as well. And then there's an integrations option. And this integrations option here is connected directly to GitHub. So I have GitHub, I have GitLab, self-managed, there's Bitbucket. So they have some integration options out of the gate. There's Jira, I was telling you about that, for bringing in tasks and epics and whatever you want to streamline even further. But it will try to do the OAuth connections for you to save time. I've already done that. So essentially GetCracking has now connected itself to GitHub. And now any changes I make in any real-time pulls or fast forwards or any command I run is directly connected to my GitHub repos. And then down here, I do like GitFlow. I don't follow it to a T, but I will say it does make feature development very easy. I'm sure we could have an entire session debating that, but I'll go dollar for dollar you on that. I think I could show you that it's a very easy workflow to integrate into an environment. And when you click that, you can rename. So remember, master has been dropped in lieu of main now, or main is now replaced master. Then it automatically creates a develop and then feature release hotfix, and you can do version tags. You can also do Git hooks and then issue tracker here if you're really trying to bring in Jira. But those are some really powerful settings that you have in here that you can do. So now that I've got GitFlow enabled, this is pretty easy to do. I've got my develop local here and my main local, and then my origins got develop in main. So I'm tracking these locally here. When you do GitFlow, you're going to start a feature by simply clicking this. You're going to have demo 10, and you're going to pull from your latest develop, which is here. Now, before I do that, I generally like to make sure I do a quick pull, make sure I'm in sync, and I'm already merged. Everything's up to date. I'm going to do demo 10, start the feature, and then now I have a working copy. So if I go into my repo here, I start making changes. Let's just add another line, fourth changes, and then save it. You're going to see that change now fly up immediately inside of GetCracking. So now I've got a complete history of every file that's been changed. This includes binaries, so even PDFs. If I go into PDFs and change text, or go into an image and change color, it's going to track all of those changes. Now let's just say perfect world, I'm done. I made the change I needed to do. The simple workflow here is to stage it. You're going to give it a hopefully good commit message. I am not, because I'm moving through this, but this is going to be very useful. That will show up in this really nice clean UI for other developers, so they can really follow what's happening to the code base and be completely informed. I'm going to commit that. And once I do that, I'm ready to close the feature. So I've made my change, I've committed my change, and I'm going to use this and hit finish feature. And I'm not going to rebase, but I am going to delete. Feature branches are completely useless to anyone except for yourself. There's no reason to hang on to them. We could do a session on stashing, and there's some other options you can do where maybe you want to persist them for some time. But in this case, it's a very quick change. I want to get it out and kill the feature branch. You'll see now my local development is tracking two changes ahead. One's the commit name, the tag, and then also the code change, than what it is out on my remote origin, which is here. The nice thing about GetCracking is I can take this and drag it down to my remote origin and do a push. And this is going to automatically push that code into GitHub. So if I come back out here and I go look at my code and swap branches and quickly get into develop, I think it was demo file, you're going to see the 4th changes are now listed. And if I go into main on the same file, it's not there. So the next step I want to do, I've been testing this, and maybe I did a local build on my server. Everything's great. I now want to actually do a pull request from my remote develop to, or origin to my main. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop. It is one of the nicest features. You also have a command line option in here, for those that still want to go that route. But from a UI perspective, it does make it easy. It's going to give me the preset options from the from, the to. I'm going from the remote branch develop to my remote branch origin main, and I'm going to give it a title. Let's just change it to this. Hopefully you do it better. If you have reviewers in your system, you can add them. You can set up a lot of different business rules around that and permissions and how things move through your environment. But simplicity's sake, I've created a pull request. Now you can go directly from here to GitHub. I've already got it pulled up. If I come back into the repo here, you're going to see pull request. And as a developer, I'm reviewing this for a peer. I can go through, see all the changes, make comments, kill it, squash it, depending on how your settings and your configurations are. But for sake of this, I'm going to merge it and say confirm. Now, if we hurry up and go back into Jenkins and come back out here, you're going to see, if I caught it, there is now a pending build occurring inside of my ColdFusion Summit project. And as you can see here now in real time, without having to push the build now or do anything, that trigger from Git and that pull request that was successfully merged is now running each one of these steps. And I can get a health check back when this is complete. I can also get notifications if it fails. But right now, this is doing all those earlier tasks that we tried to highlight in an automated state. Now, if this was probably a more involved session on this, I'd probably show you a full-on build of the servers, installations. But I think the gist is there's really a number of possibilities that you can use if you're in this type of a setup. So I'm going to let this finish here, and then I'm going to drill into a couple of the logs, and I'm going to show you the commands that were executed. So the nice thing here, you can go individually for each step of the process and get the logs. You can also go into the actual build itself here or here, and you can get all that information as well. So for example, if I come into here, you're going to see where right here the SSH key was used. I cloned my repository, and then it began to run certain tasks. If I go to, let's do the actual install. This is the CF part of it. So I ran that batch that we looked at earlier. It ran this command line for install PDF. Oh, I forgot to uninstall it, but you can see there that the response output was the following packages will be installed. So it automatically, through the pipeline, through the new features of 2021, used that CFPM, went out, checked to see what the latest version of the PDF was, will it work with my server, and then actually try to install it. But since it was already installed, it just continued on through the processing and moved to the next step. This is a really neat feature, is a scan and install. Again, 2021 feature, ran that batch command that you saw earlier in the configuration of the script. It then ran that check against my local host, and then it said the following packages will be installed. So it determined I needed HTML to PDF, PDF event gateways, debugger, document Derby, and ORM. And then it gave me all of the packages in the versions and the dependencies that will be installed. So it would have cycled through these had I uninstalled them and would have done install, and then eventually I would have gotten a termination here, scanning the installation is complete. So as you can see, after this completes, maybe you kick off a different pipeline, and that pipeline then spins up multiple built nodes that then do maybe deployments to a cloud server. SSH, it's fine. You know, you can go that route. You get rsync code between servers. Maybe you're going to move it to a build server or local and then come from there. But the gist of it here is that there's a lot of capabilities and functionalities built into this. There is a pipeline syntax creator if you really want some you know, help getting things going. There's a number of things in here for Linux, Windows. Here's Windows batch script, and it will give you the default. So you type in whatever you need, and you hit generate, and it's going to generate the script. I can switch it to echoes, you know, whatever the case is. It gives you the script. So I would probably do multiple sessions on Jenkins. There's so much in there. Again, monitoring, checking the health of things, but ultimately that's you know, how to tie all these pieces in. You can create a dev job, maybe a stage or a production job, have different things fire in different sequences, and do deployments for you, and all of that. So there is a nice logging feature in here too. So if you ever do have build issues, there is a console output by each one, and this also tells you the count of the changes with the tag. So you can see it gives you a lot of visibility, connections between Jenkins, Git, and even GetCracking, you know, your GUI editor. So all this is in sync and tied in. If you want to throw Jira in for the hell of it, you know, my topic of this session today was frustrated with project managers. Sorry if there's any on the phone, but there's more visibility into what you're doing. Maybe that's a good thing or bad thing, but there's at least visibility so the questions or potential meetings and other things can get reduced to where you spend more time doing what you do best, and that's coding, hopefully. And you do get a console output, so if you get errors, you can see it's a little verbose, but it does give you line by line. Let me see if I got a busted build down here somewhere. Here's one here. It'll give you the breakdown of what went wrong. And you can see here, there was an issue running the CF stop. I had a configuration issue inside of Jenkins. So it can get a little tricky debugging in your pipeline. Will probably go quite a bit in size, but it is a very useful tool. And then lastly, you know, let's just, for sake of conversation, the code went out to live, everything is done, production went successful. I now would come into here. You can see I've got a 3 behind here on my local. It's very simple to sync. I say pull fast forward, and within half a second, you're now up to date and you're ready to create your new feature and go. You've got the working history. Nice thing in GetCracking is you can drill into any one of these at any time, and you can see the code. So you can see over here, we've got this demo file. You can go to the tree view, but also if you click on it, it does have this inline editor, and it's going to show you the differences in the files from that build. So if there's ever questions of what went, what was changed, who changed it, that should not be a mystery in 2021. Unfortunately, I think quite a few shops still experience that challenge, but there's a lot of tools and functionality built into here. So that is it for the demo. I'm going to leave some time here for questions. Let's see here. Okay. All right, I'm wrapped up. Questions, anybody? Good. All right, well, I don't think there's any questions, so I want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend today, and I really appreciate it. Thanks again, and yeah, good luck. Enjoy the rest of the conference.